You are listening to Perplexity.
We've all thought we've heard something and been mistaken, but what if you were persistently having these experiences? What if the sounds were vivid, like an actual voice or song? What if you plugged your ears and the noise was coming from inside of your head? This is different from a hearing problem, or when some people say there's a narrator in their head. This is just how normal sound sounds to us, except it seems to be coming from inside your head. I'm talking about auditory hallucinations, also known as paracusias. Within my research into this topic, I also came across something called exploding head syndrome. I do have some stories to share with you today, including some of my own. These types of experiences can also happen in such a way that the sound appears to come from another room. For me, the big question is, can this all be explained by science? Or could this have anything to do with psychic, medium-like abilities? Could this have any links to the paranormal? I'll leave that up to you. Today, we will be diving into the concept of auditory hallucinations. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Perplexity, a mystery podcast. As always, I am your host, Kadra. If you are new to the show, hello and welcome. I tell tales every single week that have perplexed me. So if you love a good mystery that leaves you wanting more, don't worry, you're in the right place. And if you end up enjoying today's episode, I would love it if you continue to follow along. If you are a returning listener, hello, my friends. Welcome back. So happy you're here. This is season 3 of Perplexity, a mystery podcast. Happy 2025. For my regular listeners, you guys know that for the first time ever, I went on a hiatus. I have not posted anything for 2 weeks, and I missed you guys so much, but it did give me some much needed rest time with family, and time to prepare some really great stories for you guys. We have so many exciting things coming. I have a couple of quick announcements, and then we will dive right into this episode all about auditory hallucinations. First, I just wanted to welcome Krista, my newest member of the Perplexed Society, a patron, and happy belated birthday, Krista. You joined when I was on a break, so I hope you had the best birthday. Krista joined at the $5 tier, which means limited edition Perplexity stickers, a handwritten letter from me, early and ad-free episodes, and over 50 episodes of bonus content. So I hope you're enjoying that, Krista, and thank you again for supporting the show, as my patrons are the only way I get to keep doing this podcast. I also just wanted to let everybody know that while I was on a break, I did have some collabs come out. So I would really encourage you guys to go check those out. I did a really fun collaboration with Live Laugh Larceny podcast. It was interview format, and then also some really fun trivia I had to answer. I got to talk a lot about my show, and it was not really a strict format like this show is. So it shows more of my personal side. It was lots of fun, and Live Laugh Larceny is a great show, so go check that out. Also, really excited to announce that I had the opportunity to record with Andy Tate on his new show, Cryptic Encounters. You guys might know Andy Tate from the very popular Let's Not Meet podcast and Odd Trails. Andy is in my opinion, pioneer in the podcasting industry in my genre. He is amazing. It was really cool to record with him. We talked a lot about the paranormal, psychic ability. We got into the brain, neuroscience. I got to talk shop with him about some things in my career. It is a really great episode. So go check out Cryptic Encounters and go listen to our episode wherever you get your podcasts. Go show him some love. With this being a new season of the show, I thought this would also be a good time to just remind everybody this is a great time to join the Perplexed Society. I have early and ad-free episodes coming out on there every week, tons of bonus content. Right now, I am doing coverage on Madoff, the monster of Wall Street, and that has been a crazy story. It's literally the largest fraud in history. It's a massive Ponzi scheme. So we're talking about that all of January. It's a really great community, a great way to support the show. If you do not have the means to join the Perplexed Society, I completely understand. It is tough times for a lot of people right now. The way that you could support is by hitting the subscribe button on YouTube or leaving a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts, because each time you do that, it boosts me up the algorithms. That is the only way that I get more listeners. So thank you in advance for that. And last but certainly not least, this is a new season. So if you guys have any topic requests, send those my way. If you have listener stories, anything perplexing, creepy, mysterious, paranormal, I would love to read your story on the show. So you can send all of those requests and stories to me at perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com. Trigger warning for today's episode. This podcast will contain disturbing content. Listener discretion is advised. And as always, all of the sources that I used for today's episode will be down in the show notes. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode all about auditory hallucinations. I do want to first preface this by saying I'm not even sure if I should be calling these hallucinations. After all, they can be very real to some people, and I do not want to offend anyone. I landed on this name simply because it is largely referred to as a hallucination in the scientific community, and it helps innately explain what I'm talking about, whereas exploding head syndrome sounds a lot more terrifying, deadly, and paracusias is more of a medical term that's hard to recognize. But first, let's dive into the medical and scientific side of this mysterious phenomenon. Auditory hallucinations have a big spectrum as far as 1, how often they occur, 2, how terrifying or positive they could be for the person, 3, how simplified or complex the sounds can be. Some people report having these auditory hallucinations daily, while other people, like myself, may have just had them one time. More on that later. They're also quite common. It's actually estimated that somewhere between 5 to 28% of the population in the United States alone has had at least one instance of an auditory hallucination, making them the most common type of hallucination. One of the most common types to have is known as an auditory hypnagogic hallucination, and these are auditory hallucinations that occur while falling asleep or waking up. These specifically are so common that it's actually said they should not be cause for concern. But up to 70% of people will experience a hypnagogic hallucination at least once. There are 2 main types of auditory hallucinations: hearing voices or hearing other various sounds. However, other people can have musical hallucinations, which are sometimes referred to as musical ear syndrome or musical tinnitus. People like my own mother. Again, more on that later. But these musical hallucinations are separate from what is commonly referred to as earworm, which is basically what we have all experienced when we have that catchy song stuck in our head. So, who is more likely to experience an auditory hallucination? According to the Cleveland Clinic, these are most likely to affect people with schizophrenia and/or PTSD, but they can happen to anybody, whether you have a diagnosed health condition or not. They can also be drug-induced. But at the same time, having hallucinations when you're awake can be a sign of an underlying neurologic condition. So, if you are experiencing them, medical websites recommend talking to a doctor, especially if the hallucinations are causing you to be distressed. Auditory hallucinations are also more common if you have bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, depression, hearing loss, with studies showing the more severe hearing loss is more likely to have these hallucinations, Parkinson's disease, insomnia, narcolepsy, migraine, stroke, brain tumors, or lesions. And part of why I wanted to cover this topic is because it's so common, but it is very mysterious. Scientists don't know why this happens, but they do have some theories, which we will discuss at the end of this episode. Auditory hallucinations can also be the result of alcohol and drug use, lack of sleep, extreme hunger, medication side effects, certain infections like UTIs, or recovering from anesthesia. Certain medications, as well as forms of psychological therapy, have been known to help with auditory hallucinations. Things that help with auditory hypnagogic hallucinations, the ones that happen when you're falling asleep or waking up, are getting good quality sleep, following a sleep schedule, avoiding alcohol and certain drugs and medications. For auditory hallucinations caused by mental health or neurologic conditions, it is said that support groups, distraction techniques, and either ignoring the noises or standing up to them can be helpful. So now that we know more about the scientific and the medical side of auditory hallucinations and exploding head syndrome, let's get into some encounter stories. As I briefly mentioned earlier, my mom has had experiences, particularly with hearing music, and she's the person that actually inspired me to do this episode. She wrote her experience up for me a long time ago, and it has perplexed me for quite some time. As my mom has explained it, she started experiencing auditory hallucinations in 2006, shortly after she had a car accident in December 2005. Here's a quote from my mom. "The first time it ever happened to me, it sounded like a car was outside on our driveway, blaring their radio. It was so loud I couldn't sleep. So I got out of bed and started going room to room in search of the music source. Every time I moved to a different room, the music level never changed. It stayed consistent. It also appeared to be repeating the same riff over and over and over again. And I could also hear every individual instrument making up each sound. So finally, I stopped and plugged my ears with my fingers. And I discovered the music was playing right inside my ears, as if I was wearing earbuds. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Literally." End quote. My mom was also dealing with some personal stressors at that time, so she has wondered if that could have contributed, if her mind was trying to find ways to cope. My mom is a Christian and loves worship music. This has always made her feel refreshed. She eventually learned how to play guitar, but during this time, she didn't know how to play any musical instrument. She did, however, sing. So during this time, she got into a new passion, learning how to play guitar and writing songs. Many of the songs she wrote actually resulted from riffs she would hear in these episodes of auditory hallucinations. Here's another quote from my mom. "One of the first songs I ever wrote was called Healing. In this song, my auditory hallucination included the entire chorus with lyrics and all. I sat in the bathroom on the closed lid of the toilet with a scratched piece of paper and pen. I wrote, 'I want to be free. I need your presence to surround me and give me healing to see, healing to believe, healing to know that you're my God.' It didn't really rhyme in all the right places, but once I started writing verses and a bridge later in the next week or so, I couldn't bring myself to change it. I wanted it to be exactly the way that I had heard it. So I left it as this." End quote. Then it seemed that her auditory hallucinations had gone from just music to hearing a voice. Here's another quote from my mom. "One of the worship leaders at our church was named David. In another auditory hallucination I had, I began hearing his voice singing this phrase over and over. 'Never gonna let you go. Never gonna let you go.' I remembered that particular song was rather annoying because it wouldn't go away. And the repetition kept going on and on and on. I ended up finishing the song over the next few days, and I asked David to play and record it for me, since his voice is the one that I heard." End quote. So what's so fascinating about this and what I love about my mom's story is these hallucinations were positive. They allowed her to develop her musical craft. They helped her manage her stress. And my mom still has experiences today. She says, quote, "Sometimes they're super annoying when I'm trying to go to sleep, but for the most part, I've learned to live with them. Sometimes I stop and listen for a while, and other times I try to get them to stop as quick as I can, and I ignore them. When I hear them now, it's more of a muffled tune, like someone's car radio is way off in the distance. I can hear a tune, but I can't quite make out distinct musical instruments making up the sounds, and there are never any lyrics with it. I've noticed that it happens when I'm first about to drift off to sleep or in the middle of the night when my head is tilted to the right. Typically, if I turn my head back to the left and turn on my side, it goes away. To this day, I still have some PTSD from my car accident in 2005. I mostly notice it when I watch TV and someone crashes a car, a bike, or has some sort of collision accident. I cannot watch shows like America's Funniest Home Videos or Reels where people are getting hit with something or flying off a trampoline. Otherwise, I'll feel adrenaline jolt through me. I'm not really sure why I still have auditory hallucinations, but I believe the car accident had something to do with it." End quote. She also ended up having her hearing checked and everything appeared normal. She also cannot pinpoint her symptoms being the result of any type of medication. She ended her letter to me by saying, "For now, I just accept these hallucinations. They're part of my life and I'm okay with that. I feel like they are there for a reason, so I don't try to fight it." End quote. I also came across some similar experiences on Reddit, particularly involving music. Here's a quote from one that I found from Reddit user Lost Alaska. Quote, "When I had COVID and a fever, I woke up in the middle of the night hearing classical music being played. I could hear the string sections and brass. It sounded faint, like a neighbor. Parentheses, I'm in an apartment. They were playing their music so loud. I got up walking around the apartment trying to find the location. After 30 minutes of wandering around my apartment, I realized the radiators were making a very high-pitched whine, and if I stood in just the right spot, I could hear all 3 radiators, and they made a slightly off-key chord. And that's what I had been hearing. And my brain cooking away in my feverish head said that chord that sounds like someone playing a cheap recorder was converted into some of the most beautiful classical music I think I've ever heard." End quote. So for them, they were able to pinpoint this one specific thing in the home that seemed to inspire the sound, but then their brain made it much more vivid, made it into this beautiful classical song. I also mentioned earlier in the episode, I have had some experiences with auditory hallucinations. However, mine were not positive like my mom's, so we're gonna take a turn. When I was a child, I heard my name being called and a rustling sound coming from our upstairs office when no one was home. And when I went out into the hallway to check, I felt a shrill whisper coming from the side on my ear that said my name. I would also sometimes hear footsteps coming from our attic at night when everyone was sound asleep. But who's to say this wasn't because our house was haunted? I never had any auditory hallucinations again until about a year ago. I had taken Delta-8 powder to help me sleep, which comes from cannabis sativa plant for people who aren't familiar. I had never taken it before, but I had taken a very, very, very small amount. 2 separate times during the night, I had very vivid but short auditory hallucinations. The first one that woke me was the sound of shattering glass. It sounded like it came from the living room, and it was so loud, I thought someone had broken into our home. But I shot up out of bed and ran towards the noise. My heart was pounding, and it's like part of me immediately knew it wasn't real, but another part of me was like, what are you doing? That's so dangerous. Like, why didn't I go hide? I checked the entire house. My dog wasn't barking. TJ was sound asleep. Nothing was out of order. So that's when I obviously realized it was a hallucination, and I fell back asleep. I'm not sure how much time had passed, but later that same night, I woke up again. This time it was the sound of TJ screaming, like he was in great pain. It was so loud, and it seemed to come from my right side, the side that he was sleeping on. I shot out of bed, but of course when I looked over, he was turned with his back away from me, sound asleep. Needless to say, I didn't take that powder ever again. I ended up doing research after that experience, and it turns out hypnagogic hallucinations and auditory hallucinations with Delta-8 and with cannabis in general are not uncommon. I also came across an article from Clinical Sleep Medicine that described exploding head syndrome. Quote, "Exploding head syndrome, EHS, is a rare sleep disorder characterized by an explosive feeling in the head that occurs during the sleep-wake transition. The attacks are characterized by sudden loud noises, described as being like a bomb explosion, gunshot, door slamming, roar, or buzzing noise." End quote. Sounds a lot like what I experienced. I also came across several Reddit experiences. Here's one from Reddit user Larry Bin SJC that I found in the Delta 8 subreddit. Quote, I recently started using D8 as a sleep aid with excellent results. Life-changing, for a lifelong insomniac, in fact. One thing that I've noticed is that I'm consistently having very mild and short-lived auditory hallucinations while under its influence. Examples would be like the sound of dancing steam being released from a pressure cooker, a creaking door opening, the backup beeper on a piece of heavy equipment, that kind of thing. The sound appears to be within 10 feet and usually occurs to my left. It usually lasts 2 to 3 seconds. It usually occurs about a half hour after the effects have kicked in. It's not unpleasant, scary, or causing any anxiety or anything, which is just odd. And no, these are not real sounds. To go back to my examples, we don't have a pressure cooker. None of our doors creak. There's no excavator backing up in the kitchen. Has anyone else experienced this? I've never experienced this with any other THC-based substance. End quote. So from my experience, I'm wondering if my mix of anxiety disorder, not getting the best night's sleep, and taking Delta 8 resulted in a vivid hypnagogic hallucination or some type of exploding head syndrome. But what about experiences that don't seem to have any type of explanation? Is it possible that any of these quote-unquote hallucinations could actually be, and stay with me here, encounters with the paranormal? Now again, I want to be incredibly clear. This could be controversial. I am not trying to make a mockery of or disrespect people with mental illnesses. Nor am I trying to make a mockery of or disrespect people like psychic mediums, clairvoyant people. I am just here to present some information and give you some things to think about. This show is all about the perplexing, and that requires keeping an open mind. So let's get into this paranormal side of auditory hallucinations. According to sci-fi.com, there was an article written by Elizabeth Rain who says, quote, some people are more likely to claim they literally hear the voices of the dead, meaning they actually hear the sound of a voice that originates from inside or outside their own head. Known as clairaudience, this phenomenon has been linked to certain predispositions by new research. These include experiences of auditory hallucinations or a high susceptibility to them. Because most clairaudients claim the voices are positive and can be controlled, understanding where they come from can help scientists figure out how to approach certain mental illnesses that cause negative auditory hallucinations. This is why religion scholar Adam Powell interviewed self-proclaimed spiritualist mediums who experienced clairaudience as part of Durham University's Hearing the Voice project. He and his team looked at the occurrences of this experience and how certain abilities and personality traits are connected. They found one of the most dominant predispositions in people who were supposedly clairaudient was absorption, or the tendency to get so lost in doing something you just about forget everything else around you. Adam Powell said, quote, we saw a very strong connection between absorption and both hallucination proneness and the frequency of hearing from the dead. Powell also recently led a study published in Mental Health, Religion, and Culture. He said, quote, one possibility for this connection has to do with a person's ability or tendency to direct their attention to stimuli and experiences that are internal or external, and to be able to identify them as such. So you may be wondering, what the heck does this mean? What did you just say? Basically, what Adam Powell is saying is people who have really good selective attention, meaning they can focus on something in the midst of distractions, are more likely to have clairaudience. They're more likely to hear voices from beyond the grave. Rain then went on to explain experiences like this, saying, quote, imagine being so into reading a book you almost feel as if you exist in that other world. Being highly absorptive is something like that. Powell believes that those who believe they hear ghosts talking to them may possibly be going through the transformation of internal thoughts into external experiences. More subjects heard the voices inside their heads during his research, as if someone was speaking directly into their ear rather than outside. Both cases are still seen scientifically as the externalization of thoughts that could have started in the subconscious. So you see where the controversy could come in. This would imply what psychic mediums are hearing is not an external stimulus, but an internal one. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that internal stimuli came from that person themselves. Let's say what these mediums are hearing is the real deal. Could that mean spirits tend to follow psychic mediums around? How many of clairaudient subjects live near a place with a reputation for being haunted? And what about those situations when an unnerving amount of people, even those who swear up and down there's no such thing as ghosts, visit a haunted place and report hearing strange noises? Most chilling of all, if a ghost is not actually floating and whispering in someone's ear, could it be that the person is hearing a voice from another realm? These uncertainties are still floating in a gray area, and for now, it's out of the reach of science. However, what can be studied could open a portal into a world, at least for now, that only exists in ghost stories. And these types of experiences, while they can absolutely be terrifying and require treatment, they could also be very positive or enlightening for others. Spiritualists, those who believe that dead people have ways of communicating with us, tend to be less distressed by their strange experiences compared to other people. Many spiritualists have reported lower stress levels and a decreased need for coping. Gaining an understanding for how these experiences develop can also be very important because it could lead to a greater understanding about what to do when a person has a negative experience, like experiences during a period of psychosis or with schizophrenia. Studies show many of these individuals also had unusual auditory experiences in younger years. Here's a seemingly paranormal Reddit story that I came across that ties to auditory hallucinations. This is from Reddit user Proverb13. Quote, "Peace. This is a first-time experience for me, so it's kind of sticking out in my mind for now. I wasn't sure if this is a good place to post, so thanks. I live in Baltimore, Maryland, and my parents still live in the townhouse that we moved to in '85. Growing up, other family members would have minor experiences that could be written off. Now, I'm 44, and I still visit daily. My sis has 3 kids that stay with them in that home, 2 of which are younger than 5 years old. I am completely convinced that there is a little boy ghost that's living there as well. So Sunday afternoon, I was at my father's and I needed to swipe some toilet paper for my apartment for free. You dig? So I went up to grab some toilet paper out of the bathroom on the 2nd floor. All the bathroom doors were closed. My mom was out to church, so it was dark and quiet. I knocked to see if anyone was in the bathroom, and I heard, 'Hello?' I said, 'Oh, sorry man, you using the bathroom?' The voice replied, 'No.' So I opened the door and the freaking bathroom was empty. I shouted to Monk, my sister, who was in her room, door closed. I asked her about where my nephew Kai was. He was in her room with the door closed. They were in there watching TV. She didn't even know I was upstairs until I knocked and shouted through her door. I swore Kai was in the bathroom, and I didn't even realize what happened until it was over. Thinking about it more, I realize now that the voice didn't sound like it was in the bathroom, but maybe closer? It was faint, but distinct. That's why I asked if my nephew was in there using the bathroom. The thing that gets me is it happened in real time. I spoke, and it freaking spoke back. A bit of background on this child ghost, if that's what it is. My older nephew had an imaginary friend that he, using air quotes, proved to me was real. One day, when he was young, about the same age as my nephew Kai is now. That's another story if you want to hear it. But the short of it, he described him to me as a little boy with a black and white striped shirt. He also said, "He looks just like me." That kind of creeped me out. My father was born with a veil over his face. He served in the Navy, a serious man. He's seen things. He doesn't talk much about them. But he's told me about things he sees in the time between sleep and waking up. He calls it twilight. One day, he said he thought my nephew was playing on his bed while he slept. He woke up and saw a little boy sitting at the end of the bed. He smiled, hopped off the bed, and left the room. My father shrugged it off, but when I asked him how did he look, he told me it was a little boy with a black and white striped shirt on. That's all he remembered. This was years ago. My younger nephew still has an imaginary friend, but not sure if he's so innocent anymore. I don't believe in coincidences, so what do you think? I don't have a lot of people I can talk about these things with seriously on my end." End quote. Pretty creepy, and an example of something that could arguably be an auditory hallucination, but at the same time, there's these physical descriptions of the spirit that are matching up to things that other people have experienced in the house. And it sounds like the voice that this Reddit user heard came from a little boy. But for me, the big question is, like, if this is a ghost, how do ghosts communicate with us? Is it from another dimension, and is it an external stimulus, or is it some type of internal connection with like our cells, our atoms? I don't really know how to voice that, but do you guys get what I'm saying? It's so mysterious and interesting to me. I also came across an interesting set of stories in a ghost subreddit titled, "Has anyone heard of ghosts actually speaking before?" Reddit user SQPY said, quote, "Hearing single words and short paragraphs isn't uncommon. Conversations are very unusual. Hearing one's name called is pretty common too. From what I understand, there are two basic ideas about this: ghosts, spirits, whatever can physically access you and discover your name, or they imprint something that your brain interprets as your name. This goes for other audible effects too, since presumably ghosts don't have vocal cords or lungs. I have heard my name come out of nowhere plenty of times during absolute wakefulness. For example, at work, and when investigating, no one was around or no one fessed up to it. Most of these happen during the day. My name is not common, so it would be unusual to just hear it from a random stranger looking to talk to someone else. I have had conversations with disembodied voices, but they all happened during hypnagogic, sleep-deprived, or otherwise altered state situations. So not the same as what you describe. Those conversations were mostly nonsense, by the way, grammatical and comprehensible, but the content was nutty. In general, lore recommends you do not engage with spirits in a conversation unless you're prepared to deal with them. Doing so can open you up to all sorts of weirdness that can quickly get out of control. This holds for all cultures with spirit traditions that I've run across. The general advice is ignore them and move along. There's also a lot of lore about ghosts being confused, very focused on one thing, and/or really limited in making themselves understood. Spirits that aren't formally living people can be an entirely different thing when attempting to communicate with us. They're typically far more comprehensible, but do you really want that? Me, I have enough to deal with in my everyday life. I don't need any of that. Thanks." End quote. I wanted to include that story because I thought they articulated it so well. The mystery of, like, if ghosts are communicating with us, how? And they also had some really interesting experiences of their own. This other story comes from Reddit user Wicksteed. Quote, "There's only been one time in my life that made me think that was similar to a ghost-like encounter, and scared me for a minute. But it involved a human voice, so it makes me doubtful if it was a ghost or not. Out of curiosity and interest, I am posting this thread asking for any accounts of someone hearing a ghost say something. So for the curious, here is why I ask. Warning, this is not a ghost story. It was a voice coming out of the darkness near an abandoned smokehouse at around midnight on a reservation that I used to live on. A female voice kept saying the same thing over and over and wouldn't engage me in conversation. When I tried to ask if something was wrong, she kept saying things like, 'Who are you?' and 'Are you ... someone's name that I don't recall. These things she said didn't make any sense because I was just passing by on my bicycle. It was pitch black, and we were too far away from each other to even see each other. I passed by this old abandoned building every night for a year at the same time on my way to work. There is never anyone there. no one would have any reason to be there, and it's just a deserted area on the way to work. I found out later that within the tribe, this particular part of the reservation is believed to be very haunted. And my landlord told me about a much more explainable ghost encounter that she had in broad daylight while awake and living in this area. A ghost she saw after moving to the reservation, but before anyone told her this part of the reservation is haunted. When I first moved here, I didn't know about its supposedly haunted past, and I had feelings, which made me feel panic of being malevolently watched at night, which I'd never experienced before, and a heavy gloom and thickness in the air, sometimes that I had never experienced elsewhere. End quote. This next story comes from Reddit user Back That Cass Up. Nice. Quote, "What does it mean to hear someone call your name, but no one is there? I'm sure it's a pretty common experience to sometimes hear someone call your name when no one is actually there. I have had this experience a few times throughout my life, but this one experience in particular really sticks out to me. This happened a few years ago. I had just moved into a new apartment with my best friend at the time. She was gone at work, and I was in the kitchen cooking. Randomly, I heard her call my name, clear as day. Cass. It startled me, because I knew she was supposed to be at work, but quickly assumed she came home early and wanted to talk to me about something. I kept cooking, and I just yelled back, 'What?' Then I heard it again, even more clearly. Cass. It sounded like it was coming from outside the front door. I thought maybe she had forgotten her key or something and was calling for me to come unlock the door. But when I opened the door, no one was there." Now, I do believe that our minds can do weird things without explanation, and I'm not closed off to the reality that it could just be an auditory hallucination or something explainable. But what was so different about this time is that it happened twice in a row, and in her voice specifically. I remember briefly thinking maybe something bad had happened to her, and her spirit was calling me. But I called her cell phone, and she was perfectly safe and sound at work. End quote. This story is highly upsetting to me because it sounds like a mimic, which is a malevolent entity. It is a trickster spirit that is known to mimic the voices of people you love. And this person responded to it, which is how you invite them in. Very creepy. I hate mimics. So now that we've heard a good amount of encounter stories, let's start to wrap this episode up, put a nice bow on things, and let's briefly discuss some possible theories. So of course, one big theory with this and in the scientific community is that it is something in our brain. Now, scientists don't know the exact mechanisms in our brain that cause an auditory hallucination, but they have a lot of theories. It could be some type of spontaneous activation in our brain, specifically in the auditory network area, also known as the left superior temporal gyrus, the transverse temporal gyri, and the left temporal lobe. Scientists have also wondered if this could be some type of imbalance in our brain within the neurotransmitters, like a lack of dopamine and serotonin. Another theory, one that I referenced from Powell, that paranormal researcher who is more in the scientific realm, is the concept of absorption, or the tendency to get so lost in doing something you forget everything else around you. Studies have found a strong connection between people who experience absorption as well as hearing from the dead. And this could be due to a person's natural tendency to direct their attention to other stimuli. People who believe they're talking to ghosts may be experiencing a transformation of their internal thoughts becoming an external experience. And this reminded me of the concept of tulpas. I have talked briefly about tulpas on many other episodes, but it's common in Eastern beliefs, and it's that idea that if you believe something hard enough, you can bring it into tangible existence. Another theory is that people who have these types of auditory experiences may have some type of psychic ability, or perhaps it's a connection between our brain and the spiritual realm. After all, there have been several promising studies where brain mapping has been done with psychics and abnormal brain waves were found. I dove into this much deeper in episode 82, by the way. So if you want to hear more about this theory and a lot more examples of research and experiences, I would highly recommend listening to that episode. But just to briefly summarize, in more recent years, scientists have started to examine psychics and are actually finding evidence through brain mapping that there are some significant differences between a psychic's brain and a non-psychic's brain. There's also been research on deep meditation and the ability to acquire these types of abilities. It's not necessarily something you have to be born with. Another theory is this could be because of some type of alternate reality. Maybe we're hearing things in another realm. If you're open to the idea of the paranormal and tools that are used by paranormal experts like spirit boxes, this is worth considering. Our universe is vast and mysterious. So perhaps there are people and creatures that are with us in a certain sense, but beyond the veil. And every once in a while, they reach out and come through. Whatever the case, whatever is causing people all around the world to experience auditory hallucinations, this concept is certainly perplexing. And that, everybody, is my episode, all about auditory hallucinations. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, I would love it so much if you gave me some feedback. Let me know. Drop a comment on Spotify if you were listening to this episode there. Drop a comment on YouTube and give the video a like. Hit that subscribe button. And let me know if you have had an auditory hallucination. I would love to hear about it. You can always send your experiences and topic requests to perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com. And just another reminder, if you have not done so yet, please take 2 seconds, go on Apple and Spotify and leave a 5-star review. It really helps the show so much. Remember, if you want to support the show further and unlock exclusive bonus content, go check out patreon.com/perplexitymysterypodcast. Happy 2025. I hope you guys are having an amazing January, and I'm so excited to dive into season 3 with you guys this year. You all are amazing. I hope you have a great week and stay safe, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Perplexity, a mystery podcast, hosted, written, and produced by Kadra Brannon. Assistant producer is TJ McCrae. If you enjoyed today's episode, tell the world about it by leaving a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really is the best way to support. Have a topic request or a perplexing story of your own you'd like to share? Send an email to perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to support the show further and unlock exclusive bonus content, join the Perplexed Society at patreon.com/Perplexity Mystery Podcast. Perplexity merch and additional support links can be found in the episode description. Until next week, stay curious.